Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Sardana. I'm with SeamlessMD, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Joshua Liu. A little fun fact before Josh talks, he actually has everyone in the office call him Dr. Joshua Liu, and you can't call him Josh or anything else.
So Alan just lost all credibility because he made stuff up at the very start of our first episodes. I mean, the truth is that like Alan and I were talking the other week, and we thought, hey, like we think it would be great if number one, there's something I guess else to do during the pandemic, but two was we think it's great if we can share more of our company's culture and personality with our customers, our partners, the rest of the world, and we're obviously very deep in digital patient engagement and digital health, and we're learning a lot, and maybe we can share some insight of what we're learning to the rest of the world.
Any technology company, any product that this industry is implementing, it's running on people. And people are kind of the backbones behind what makes a successful tech company and what makes a successful product. And I think a lot of the people and the diversity that the team brings is sort of what we wanted to highlight on this show. So that the industry can get to know who is SeamlessMD and who are the people behind the company that really make the company what it is.
Definitely, and for sure, Alan. Probably like the third thing, if we're on three now, I haven't been counting properly, but obviously you and I have really amazing conversations, and we felt it wouldn't do the world justice if no one else could watch our riffs and our conversations.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep. Totally agree. Where we wanted to take this first episode, at least, is really understanding, who is SeamlessMD, what is SeamlessMD, and how did it start? What's the journey been like? Without throwing 1,000 questions to you all at once, I'm curious if you can kind of maybe summarize the journey so far, but maybe more importantly, where the genesis of the idea came from and who was involved in that sort of area for the beginnings.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll start by saying, Alan, one of I think the neat things about our team is that just like a team in a hospital or a health system, we're also very interdisciplinary. So I mean, Alan actually, and we got an interview at some point about your favorite film. So actually, Alan, he's in marketing now, but he was a film major in school, and we have folks on our team who come from many different disciplines, but actually a quarter of our team are people from the clinical world. And so I came from the clinical world myself. I did my med school training here in Toronto. And as I went through med school, a lot of my friends knew what they wanted to do. They knew they wanted to be a cardiologist or a family doctor. I didn't have that clarity. And by the way, now I kind of think that that's very much okay. But at the time, I felt lost. But I had these great mentors at UHN or Toronto General Hospital, for those who are familiar. And they said, Josh, you know what? Come spend a summer with us, learning about quality and patient safety. And specifically, I ended up doing work at the hospital on understanding readmissions.
Mm-hmm.
And I became really passionate about that problem space. And I started thinking, geez, shouldn't there be a way to, monitor a patient and prevent a readmission? And that was kind of midway through med school. I kind of parked that idea for a little bit. But in my third year of med school, I started getting interested in like startups and technology. I don't remember exactly why, Alan. I just think it was starting to pop up in the world around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had two friends from class who were interested in just like starting something together with me. And so we had all kinds of ideas of problems that we saw in healthcare. And then we actually tried building a completely different healthcare tech company than Seamless when I was in third year.
So it was this an app as well?
Didn't quite get that far,
okay.
But basically the idea that we had was like when a patient goes and sees a doctor, a lot of time is spent answering a bunch of questions about like their medical history and why they're here for the visit, and then the doctor has to like document all of that and so forth. And so we thought, oh, like what if a patient could like pre-fill out an intelligent questionnaire about their symptoms and why they're at the doctor's office, and then we could just automate that story to the doctor before the visit, and then the doctor could just read it and they go, oh, I know exactly what's going on, or at least have a better idea. And then maybe your visit is like takes half the time instead. And then the doctor could see more patients during the day. and we built like a pitch deck, and we like had like mock-ups and screenshots and stuff like that. But we actually never built a prototype, and we gave up probably 4 or 5 months later. And I bring this up because I feel like too often people only hear about the successes and the things that have worked out, and like most people don't realize that I've tried starting something else that failed. But one of my challenges, Alan, was that we were all like clinical people. None of us were in software or business, and so I just feel like we were missing a lot of important complementary skill sets that if I had back then in a team what we have at Seamless, maybe we would have built that company. I don't know.
I figure that company would have probably been up against major EHRs and that kind of competition space, because I imagine that's the kind of pre-screening that can be done now through something like MyChart, for instance, and maybe.
Oh yeah, you're right. Like we if I kept to it, we'd probably be the number one competitor at Epic right now.
Right.
You totally missed the boat, Alan. You're totally right.
Exactly.
Okay, I tell you, you're absolutely right.
I think something else that's interesting that I know about you, even well before SeamlessMD and even before that company, I think you've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And I've heard stories even through whether it was university or high school. I know that you were always kind of looking for where can you add value to whatever industry you were a part of or student body community that you were in. Was that just kind of natural to you? Because I know you're saying you almost didn't know what you wanted to do in your schooling, but it seemed like that entrepreneurial kind of drive was always there. Did you
I
agree
like,
with that?
Alan, how you really framed it from a very noble perspective of like Josh seems like a person always adding value to his community, which I appreciate. I mean, the truth is that like I like building stuff, and I think I'm the kind of person where I need to keep doing something different to be engaged and excited. And so one of the things I like about like entrepreneurship or building, like early on in my life was like building nonprofits at school and things like that is as you grow and build a project or an organization, you keep having to come across like new obstacles, new challenges, and then that continuous learning you have to do keeps me engaged and excited. Whereas I think one of the challenges I had with day-to-day medicine, for example, was that you end up becoming an expert at your craft by becoming really good at something. But I think kind of like you, I like being more of a generalist who kind of has different adventures and is forced to learn different skills all the time.
I think that's really important for a startup in particular, to figure out all the different moving parts and needing to wear all these different hats to get the job done.
Oh, Alan, can I give you a really cheesy like healthcare analogy to that idea?
Of course, yes.
So I mean, you're right. So like in a company, like we need, and I really like the idea of like to build a really great company organization. It's like a sports team. It's like every sports team, like you have different roles that the team plays, and everyone has to be like really good at their role so the team can win a game or win the championship. And then, and like in our team, Alan, right, we need people like you who are like experts at marketing and experts at sales and customer success and patient education and human resources, right, for the team to be high performing and successful. I think one of the neat things that's changed in healthcare is that with the shift to like value-based care, and now the whole healthcare team has to care about the outcome of a patient, like both clinical but also financially. They have to think of themselves as like a high performing interdisciplinary team. So like, you not only have to work together, but like you have to start kind of thinking outside your siloed role. So now you have physicians who are, experts in quality and patient safety, or even like digital patient engagement,
Right.
because like you all have to work as a team in a new way to achieve like a better outcome together. And I think that's, so my point is that like that's historically I think not existed as much in healthcare, but now it really does, and it has to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even with the advancements in technology, that continuous learning for everyone, for physicians, is still so vitally important. Like if you look in the cardiac space with TAVRs now becoming more and more prevalent, and all these cardiac surgeons who now have to relearn certain skills so that they can still be competitive in the future as well. I'm curious about mentors, because I know that in order to get to where you are today, and even back in your residency, there was people who were almost mentors for you. And I think that had a really integral part in building SeamlessMD as well.
Yeah, so just to touch on the mentorship. So when I was, doing that work on readmissions, my mentor's name was Howie Abrahms. He was the head of internal medicine at UHN, and he's the one who got me inspired to focus on how do we prevent readmissions, because I was his kind of focus at the time, and he kind of imparted that interest on me, and I think from there, when I got to my fourth year of med school, I still had the itch to build something, because again, like I just love building stuff and working in a team, but I knew I didn't have the people around me who had different skills than me to do that.
And Josh, did you want to go into internal medicine? Was that your focus at that time?
So actually what happened was I was seriously considering internal medicine, because I loved, that was actually one of the specialties I actually really liked, like intellectually or just out of interest. But I actually applied to family medicine in my last year, mostly because it would allow me to have the flexibility, I think, to pursue other interests,
Right.
like a SeamlessMD. So I always thought that I would maybe do something like SeamlessMD maybe 10 years after I finished my training. It just so happened that with, meeting Willie and Phil and going through that next 36 incubator in my last year of med school, where we met and then we started SeamlessMD, that kind of just, changed my course. And I was fortunate to be able to work on something like Seamless, 10 years earlier.
Sorry, I cut you off right in the middle of your story, but you were focused on readmissions, and then it was your last year.
So this is a fun story. So for those people who don't know, like how the Next 36, it's a local incubator here in Toronto. And what they did at the time was they would bring people together who didn't know each other, and who wanted to meet others like-minded who wanted to start a tech company together. They bring you together and they give you mentorship and like seed capital to get started. And by the way, I think generally it's a bad idea, in the sense that generally bringing randoms together to start a company often doesn't work, because you need to have the right chemistry. So usually you're starting a company with people that you know and that you've had a working relationship with. But Willie had a background in computer science, and he actually is interested in healthcare for a long time. And then Phil was an engineer, and he really cared about building a business that had social impact. And so that was kind of, I think, why the three of us, worked out so well. But what happened was, when you come to this incubator, in the first 24 hours, they tell you, look, tomorrow you're going to do a 5-minute pitch of a business that you're going to come up with over the next 24 hours, and see you tomorrow. And so, basically.
And you were put into groups at this point. You had already been put into the group.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We went through a whole interview process. It's based on interviews done by very seasoned entrepreneurs and business people. They basically guessed which groups of like 2 or 3 would work well together. And so,
Right.
yeah, Phil and I we met each other beforehand, but they basically forced us to work together, which is totally not normal.
I think there was also a funny story, because you're talking about chemistry between the founders, and that's super important. I think I've heard a story before where Willie actually, before you guys had met formally, had communicated on this forum through the Next 36 program, and I think he didn't like you, or there was something there where.
Yeah. So before you go through the interview process where you meet everyone in person and stuff like that, there was an online community that the incubator set up, where everyone had to post a couple of ideas for business ideas, and then other people had to comment and give feedback on it, just to kind of generate discussion and community going into this whole interview process. And Willie had posted a number of different healthcare technology ideas, and I was just like, I guess, overly critical of every idea he posted. So I would post all these things that were, well, like leveraging my clinical background, like, here's why this won't work in healthcare, right? And the funny thing is that, like, if I were to do that today, as like, being in the business, I'd have a different mindset. Like, I'm now more like, well, how do we make it work? Right. But back then I was just like, oh, like, healthcare was so hard to do stuff in, so this is why it won't work, right?
Right.
And then apparently at the time, Willie was like, in his head, he was thinking, well, like, who's this jerk who keeps like crapping on all my ideas, right? And I didn't know that at the time, because I remember like when I met Willie in person during the interview, my first thought was like, oh, I really like that guy. I want to
Right.
work with him, right? And then actually, as part of the selection process for the groups, you're allowed to like rank of everyone you've met, who are the top 5 people you would want to work with, and who are like the bottom 5, right? And Willie and I actually ended up strategizing, hey, we both like each other. Let's rank each other like number one.
Right.
And I had no idea that he had hated me prior to meeting
Right.
me.
Right.
You know,
I told you
but
later.
yeah, the whole story around that.
So then you had to prepare this pitch. So at that time with Willie, Phil, and yourself, was that SeamlessMD or?
Yeah, so you know what? Like I went in there with the intention of like building a healthcare company. Like that was my honest intention. And I think that if I was in a team that didn't want to do that, I probably wouldn't have been as engaged.
Right.
And we went through a number of ideas, but at some point in the evening, I'm pretty sure I brought up like, hey, you know, like there's this like big readmissions problem that I've been studying for a while. I don't think that was the first thing I mentioned. I think I was trying to find some other maybe more easily understood ideas, or more, you know, generally acceptable ideas. But at some point I brought up, hey, like I've been working on this readmissions problem. It's big, it's costly. You know, what could we do about it? And so the next day we basically pitched a remote patient monitoring system to prevent readmissions for heart failure. And I mean, we have prevented readmissions with SeamlessMD. Although what's interesting is that even though we started off with a plan to tackle heart failure first, we actually didn't start with heart failure after talking to the market, which we can get into at some point if you want, Alan. But to some extent, what we do at Seamless is still really similar to what we kind of pitched on day one.
Yeah, and I think even more so today, because as we're branching into heart failure and we're tackling those projects now, I think it's kind of done a whole 360 all the way back to the beginning pitch.
Yeah,
made, which
full
is
circle.
really neat. I think I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners are curious. How did you pivot into surgery then? At what point did you focus on that as opposed to heart failure or other chronic conditions?
Yeah, so you know, as part of the customer discovery process, we spent months just interviewing different, you know, physicians and nurses and patients in healthcare. And initially, because we were looking at heart failure and chronic disease, and that's actually where all my mentors in my network was. That's who we met with. Like I met with all of my mentors and all the internal medicine doctors I knew to ask them about like, hey, like what if we were to monitor a patient, prevent a readmission? Like, would you use it? What would that work? Why or why not? And pretty much every internal medicine doctor I spoke with basically told me, yeah, I wouldn't do this, and like here are all the reasons why I wouldn't. And which is funny because I think if we had done that same work in the U.S., because we're in Toronto at that time in the U.S., I think they had just started having like heart failure readmission penalties. So I think that if we had talked to U.S. Groups, they would have been more on board with the idea.
Right.
But back home in Toronto, they just also saw all kinds of problems with it. And then one day, one of those internal medicine mentors offhandedly said, "You know what, Josh? Why don't you talk to surgeons? They're more tech savvy. They like the latest and greatest toy.
Innovation.
They just might find it more interesting." And I was like, okay, that's kind of disappointing, but I'll do that. And so, by the way, I didn't know any surgeons.
Right.
That wasn't my world. So we just started like cold contacting surgeons in Canada, the US by email, and we would just go on PubMed and research surgical readmissions and be like, oh, this is a problem for surgery too. And then we just started emailing surgeons who had published those papers, and then started having meetings with them, like either in person or virtually if they're in the US. And then I got far more positive feedback saying stuff like, oh yeah, Josh, come work with us. Like we have readmission problems too. And like no one's really done this in surgery before.
Right.
So I'm like, let's try it.
Yeah. And at that time, the product was post-op focused and just on readmissions and collecting patient-reported outcomes, I assume, in the post-op phase.
Correct. So at the very beginning, we were just focused on post-discharge. That's all we did. And I think that's fine, right? Like, I think when you start, like it's like a stepwise thing as you evolve the product. So at the beginning, it was post-discharge only. It was just at the time initially on mobile, like on your phone or your tablet. And then at some point, we actually when we started working with Michael Garron Hospital in Toronto, and Dr. Carmine Simone, fantastic thoracic surgeon there. I think through him, we start getting feedback about like, oh, actually, there's all these things that a patient has to prepare for before surgery, all these like protocols and steps that they forget. Like, why can't we guide the patient digitally preoperatively?
Mm-hmm.
And we said, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you explain that to us. And so I think his program was the first to actually use Seamless both preoperatively and then post-discharge.
Nice.
If you can find one visionary like Dr. Carmine Simone and Michael Garron, and you can get him to say yes and say, hey guys, this is not crazy. This is actually helpful. Like, maybe we could figure out some, workflow issues, but it makes sense. If you can find one of them and they're not crazy, which he's not,
Mm-hmm.
you can find 5 other ones. And then and if you can find 5, you can find 10. You get 10, you get to 100. So I think it's more like if you can find like the first couple, you're onto something, and you're on something real. The timing might not be perfect. You might need to wait until there's COVID-19 for the world to realize that going digital is where things should have been all along in healthcare. But I think it's more like being okay with getting the no and the skeptics, understanding why they're skeptical, because maybe you do need to reiterate your idea.
Right.
But oftentimes just finding the first couple who are willing to say yes and see the possibility, the upside to it. But yeah, like I think it's just about finding the right person.
Right. I like that. I've heard a quote before where there is no such thing as failure, just a failure to learn. I think that's pretty applicable in that case. And then speaking of early adopters, enhanced recovery after surgery was kind of at the forefront, maybe 10, 15 years ago in Europe, and had slowly been moving into Canada and the United States. Was that around the time after you did a pilot with Michael Garron when you started more of an enhanced recovery venture, I think meeting some other surgeons out of Montreal or Quebec?
Yeah. So it's fine. So you're right. So we start off in post-discharge, then we had in pre-op, and we weren't doing anything yet with the in-hospital phase. And then I met Dr. Liane Feldman from McGill, who's a phenomenal surgeon and a leader in enhanced recovery. And for those who, I hope everyone who watches this knows what enhanced recovery is. But if you don't know what enhanced recovery after surgery is it's a set of standardized evidence-based protocols before, during, and after surgery that have been proven to, accelerate recovery, shorten length of stay, reduce complications. It's things like getting patients, carb loading before surgery, mobilizing early afterwards, reducing opioids, and so forth. And so, McGill, I think, was the first hospital in North America to implement enhanced recovery protocols, and now they've spread like wildfire across the continent. But I met Liane, and she taught me about enhanced recovery. I had no idea what it was,
Mm-hmm.
and she was, showing me how there's all these evidence-based steps that something like Seamless would be really helpful for, in both increasing compliance with those steps, so making sure the patient like walks every day after surgery and their pain is controlled, but also that they're able to track that data better, so that way we can actually collect from patients data, patient-reported outcomes around, what is your pain or nausea every day? Are you able to mobilize? Are you doing your breathing, your exercises, your leg exercises? Because we know that compliance with each of these patient-oriented steps is correlated with faster recovery.
Right.
And so Liane and the team at McGill like opened up our eyes to the fact that there's an in-hospital benefit to Seamless. And so with them, we did, some great studies on showing how we can successfully, collect that ERAS compliance data while the patient's in hospital on Seamless. And then after that, we then connected our platform. So actually Seamless today, if you want to, you can actually guide the patient before hospital stay, during hospital stay, during recovery, and then post-discharge is one experience. But the point was that, like you said, Alan, we iterated that, we grew it based on like listening to our partners and learning from them. And so I've always been grateful to partners like Liane and Carmine, because, everything that we know today is founded on the learnings that they've shared with us about, safe care for patients.
Also, you mentioned about the technology almost replacing the need for an in-person auditor or somebody actually going around and asking each patient after they've have their surgery. You know, have you done these steps today? Have you sat up in your bed for X number of hours? Was there skepticism around, do patients actually use their phones for that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was interesting about how Seamless started is that we kind of almost by chance started by working with patients who were like the oldest, sickest, most complex, and the most likely to have challenges using a technology solution. So, you know, we didn't start off doing like ACL repairs and like
Right.
working with patients who were in their 20s. I
Mhm.
mean, because we were targeting, you know, preventing surgical readmissions initially, we were doing like cancer surgery and like hip and knee replacement where patients were often 60, 70, or 80. And so from the very beginning, we had to figure out how to engage and be accessible to patients who were older, frailer, didn't generally use technology. But I think that forced us early on to build something that was truly accessible and engaging for all kinds of patients. And you know, I remember when we started working with the Sunnybrook Holland Center, a big hip and knee replacement center. They actually had allowed us to come in and sit next to patients who've had a total joint or waiting for one, and so they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and actually watch them interact with SeamlessMD prototypes, so
Mhm.
that we could see, you know, where did their eyes go, where did their fingers go when they used the product, and like did it make sense to them. So early on, like we spent a ton of time with real patients, older, sicker, frailer patients, and forced ourselves to design an experience that they could use.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate being on the company side is that as smart as we are as like clinicians, there's a lot of effort required to figure out how to design software successfully for patients, and it's not as simple as just having a nice looking product. There's all the little things that we do behind the scenes. And you know, to this day, this company is still very patient centric. I mean, we interview patients weekly to improve the product. And in fact, I mean, Alan, you know this. Every Monday, as part of our all hands meeting, our Denice, our director of patient education, shares 3 stories about what did patients like about Seamless, and then she shares 3 stories about challenges patients have had with the program in the past week. And so, even though like our program has great outcomes and great engagement, we are still focused on like there's always ways to make this better for patients.
Mhm.
And that's something that, you know, frankly, as a company working on this 24/7, we have the luxury of doing.
Right. Yeah. Um, I also think, you know, I've talked with Denice quite a bit, and her main focus is on health literacy and adult learning and behavioral change. And those kind of core values have been almost woven into Seamless MD and what makes it so successful. I think having that background of, you know, where you're actually sitting with the patients and seeing how they engage with the prototypes and understand, you know, where they're looking, and then you combine that with the best practices in health literacy and adult learning, there must be a bit of a science behind that you figured out now, and there must be kind of indicators of how a patient would interact with the product. Do you still have some of that skepticism come up about, you know, do patients actually use the technology, and if you do, how do you get around that kind of clinical maybe thought that people might have?
Yeah, you know, it still comes up every now and then, and I think what's different now versus when we started SeamlessMD is that we just have so much experience that we can share with the providers about like what we've done to tackle that. So I mean, you know, we have caregiver enrollment in the platform, as you know, so that way a loved one can enroll with patients. About half our patients have a loved one enroll with them and support them on the product. And so if you're frailer and older, often your spouse or son or daughter is using Seamless with or on your behalf. Um, the fact that it's on not just phones, tablets, but also computers and the web browser.
Mhm.
And there's a long list that I could add on to that, Alan, of course. But the point is that like now when partners ask us about like, well, what about our older patients or people actually use this? We have the numbers and the playbooks and the methodologies to show how we overcome those barriers. And then so it's actually a pretty easy conversation now. It's a
Mhm.
great question still. I think it's still an important question to ask because stuff like CMS is not completely widespread yet, although I think it will be in the coming years. But I think now it's like we have the data, we have the proof points.
Right.
Um, a much easier conversation for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of glossed over it, but at what point did it move from just the mobile app to then being on all these different platforms, the web browser and tablets and computers?
Pretty early on. I think I would say definitely by within like a year and a half, we were on the web
Mhm.
as well. I think they figured out early on that for some of these older patients, they just needed an additional way. In fact, I'll tell you, I remember like when we sat down next to patients and we watched them use the product, we found that there were some patients who were 80 who had an iPad and loved their iPad, but they
Right.
forgot their iTunes password.
Yeah.
And so they had to use the web-based version of Seamless because they didn't know how to get into the App Store and download the mobile version. And so there's all these little things that you don't realize until you sit next to a patient and you watch how they interact. And then so we've been lucky to have that opportunity to sit next to patients and learn these things.
Mhm. I've heard of something called Seamless Pets before. What what was Seamless Pets?
Yeah. So Seam so in the first year of the company's life cycle, as we're going through the incubator, back then one of the sexy things to do as a startup is to like raise capital from investors, right? And there was a potential investor who was like, "Oh, I really like Seamless, but what would get me really excited about Seamless is if you provided the same thing to vets and to owners of pets, so that way they could monitor our patients after like like a pet surgery, I guess, right?"
Right.
And also the part was like the investor was saying how like, oh, it's going to be so hard to sell to like providers and hospitals, longer sales cycles, but if you sell to a vet, it's so much easier. And I think at some point during the incubator program, when we were running into a lot of obstacles trying to get into conversations with hospitals, there was a moment of why don't maybe it's not a bad idea. Maybe we should just try like doing Seamless like pets and sell to vets as like a starting point, and then eventually we'll go from pets to humans, right?
Right.
And
Prevent
so like
pet readmissions and
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, preventing pet readmissions. And I kid you not, like we bought like seamlesspets.com, I think we bought, or Seamless Vet, something like that. And we even like contacted like 50 different like vet clinics and
Yeah.
did discovery calls with like vets about where this could create value. And then I think at some point we woke up and realized like, oh my gosh, like why are we doing
Right.
this? Like
No passion behind that. Yeah.
oh my gosh, yeah. And then sometimes you're in like a sleep state and you keep doing something like this, and then
Mhm.
you realize, wait, like that has nothing to do with our mission.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that if you could show that pets are really happy with the product, I'm pretty sure the hospital wouldn't suddenly like be on board with this. So
Right. You never know. Yeah. I think one silver lining from that story that I took from is the flexibility of the product. So the technology and how it can be designed for different use cases. So whether it is pets or surgery, I think especially kind of relevant today in the COVID-19 world and post-pandemic world as we move forward. I think that flexibility is also being seen because I think we've adapted the product to fit what's necessary today. So as surgery centers and as hospitals aim to kind of restart surgery, I know that we're doing a lot of work on that front as well. Are you able to talk a little bit about how that product and how that shift has been made to kind of accommodate today's patient world and population?
yeah, I mean, I think we realized that hospitals are under immense pressure to restart elective surgery during COVID-19, and they want to do it safely. And definitely for like cardiac procedures, cancer procedures where patients can't, wait indefinitely, but they need to get it done safely. And so what we've done with a number of partners is actually create we call it a restart surgery, I guess, workflow or tool on the platform where patients can get screened preoperatively for, do they feel ready for surgery? If not, why not? If yes, why do they want it now? Their comorbidities, so like what's their risk level as a patient? Are they having any COVID-19 symptoms or risk factors of COVID-19? And then we collect all that data preoperatively, and then we have dashboards for our providers to show, okay, well, you can now start flagging which patients maybe shouldn't have surgery anytime soon because they're high risk, which ones are lower risk. We should kind of maybe feel like they're safer to have surgery sooner. Who's having symptoms of COVID-19 the week before surgery, maybe we should consider, delaying that a little bit until we know they don't have COVID-19 or it's resolved. And so, to your point, like what we've done well with the platform release is that we've made it very flexible to kind of quickly create and deploy all these kind of novel workflows as needed. And I think that's one of the unique things about, going digital is that, like, if in the analog world, if you created these workflows, you then have to like train like 100 staff members on calling every patient and doing this like by phone. Now it's just we create the workflow. All these patients were already on SeamlessMD already. Let's just like deploy that into the care pathway, and then all these patients can start getting their COVID-19 pre-surgery, readiness screening through the Seamless platform. So I think we'll find that as organizations now are more engaged to try something like this, they're going to realize how scalable it is. And that's going to be better for patients, better for providers. And it's we don't wish the pandemic had happened, but given that it's here, we think it's going to help people realize the opportunities in digital engagement. So we're just trying to do our best to support.
Yeah. I know anecdotally there was a customer of ours who had enhanced recovery, and there was a protocol in there that they found wasn't effective in reducing SSIs. And so I know when it came time to changing their enhanced recovery pathway and take that protocol out for patients, they still had all these paper booklets. And so they actually had to go through, sticker over every single mention of that in all the thousands of booklets that they had. But then they realized with technology, just like you're saying, it's at scale and it's versatile. So they can just make that change in one place and all the patient instructions are updated automatically. I'm curious, your earlier peers, when you first made that earlier company and some of your peers in medicine, what do they think about the journey so far? And have they stayed in touch and followed up on what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the funny thing is that since for those who didn't pick this up, I actually didn't even start residency. So, and now I'm not allowed to go back unless I reapply again. So
they saved your spot. I think they saved your spot for a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like they saved my spot for over 5 years, and that was very generous of them, and I was grateful. But they couldn't just hold that forever, which is fine. I don't know who's gonna write me a reference letter now to get back in, but that's okay. Honestly, I've only gotten positive feedback from my peers I went to school with, and I think part of it too is grass is green on the other side.
Sure.
So like when peers who were like doing overnight call in residency and wake up at like 5 a.m. every day to get to the hospital for 6, I think oftentimes they look at what we do at Seamless and obviously look at the marketing and they see all the great, customer videos and case studies and results, and they go, oh my God, that's so exciting. But the grass is always green on the other side. I mean, Alan, you and I know we have our own challenges in the company and obstacles we overcome, and it's not all, what's the word, like
dandy
fun
all the time. Roses,
yeah. Was it dandy?
Dandy, yeah.
Isn't there like a few other words of that phrase? Like
there's probably a perfect sentence here. Yeah, it's escaped my brain.
It's not all something and dandy. Anyways, but they all love it and they support it. But I think they don't realize that like sometimes that we have our own like imperfections in what we do and challenges. And I think obviously sometimes like, when you're running a business like ours, there's the grass looks greener on their end too, from my point of view sometimes. But no, it's been nothing positive. And I think definitely more than in the past, there are a lot more like physicians who want to like get into like technology and entrepreneurship or working at a healthcare tech organization. So, and I think, for example, there's a stat that like a third of Stanford medical graduates now end up at a startup. I feel like there's a stat that I've read like that. I don't think that's normal. I don't think that's true in most med schools, but it's definitely shifting that direction. And like, I won't name names, but I definitely know at least a couple of med school grads who kind of came after me who like they didn't start residency and they just went straight to like McKinsey or something instead. I don't know. Wow. So the world's kind of changed there. Yeah.
Huh. That's really interesting.
So Alan, I want to be cognizant of our time too, because for people who don't know, Alan and I actually had a plan of like, we're going to make these like 15-minute episodes. I've had actually a timer here, Alan. And
we're a little bit over.
I started timing, I think 3 to 4 minutes after we started. And so it's at the 42-minute mark. So, I mean, I've got 20 hours to kill if you want to keep going, but
Yeah, I don't. I have a tight schedule today.
You have a life.
I think this is a great place to end. I think learning a bit more about that SeamlessMD backstory and seeing where we've come from and understanding the diversity of the team and how that's necessary in kind of tackling these bigger problems that are huge problems in the world and big problems within the industry. I think that kind of understanding that backstory has really laid the groundwork for where we are today and where we're moving tomorrow.
Going forward, so like I think for people, what people expect, I mean, we'll be here, but I think we've talked about we're thinking of bringing some guests on, some of our colleagues at Seamless, maybe some of the friends we have in the healthcare space, clinicians, non-clinicians.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Joshua Liu, I had a really great time on this episode. Obviously, yeah. I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been really, really fascinating learning about the background and understanding where you came from in your almost past life now and how that's contributed to where you are today and the company.
I like how you say that so authentically, knowing that most of that stuff you already knew. So, but thank you for taking the time to.
There was definitely nuggets in there. I didn't know a lot of that stuff. There was nuggets in there that was new to me too. I really enjoyed that.
Appreciate that.
That was great. Okay, well, I guess we'll end it here. I think that's a good place.
All right. Thanks, Alan. See you next time.
Yeah, see ya.